People often believe that wine is boring, a beverage consumed by old white men in leather armchairs or mothers on their night off. Of course, wine is anything but boring, and that really manifests itself in the vineyard. The vine is a plant that grows all around the world and often in places that are unsuitable for other agricultural plants. You can find vines on high mountains, low valleys, in the freezing cold, and in hot deserts. Vines survive and in some cases thrive in those extreme conditions, struggling to ripen the fruit they carry and therefore producing really concentrated grapes. Truly amazing, however, is that these extreme growing conditions influence the taste of the wine, making it possible to taste the desert, the high mountain, and the icy winds in the wine. We bought wines from the extreme north, the extreme south, the steepest vineyards, the highest mountains, the weirdest soil types in order to taste these extremes. So let's go. So we're starting off with a wine from Latvia. I didn't know that they were making wine there, but anyways, this is the Cuvee Sabel from Abba Vas. So this is from one of the northernmost vineyards in Europe. It's above the 57th parallel. The vineyard is located nearby the little town of Sabel, and it's just 1.5 hectares big. The climate here is maritime, so you get some influence from the Baltic Sea here, but it's pretty cold. So making wine in a very cold climate obviously brings a lot of challenges. I mean, you have to ripen the fruit, first of all, but also if it's cold, you generally have more disease pressure in the vineyards. That will usually reduce your crop. So it's quite difficult. And yeah, even if you do all the hard work, you might not necessarily end up with a product that is great. But maybe this is great. We'll find out in a minute. They apparently work with a lot of disease-resistant grape varieties like Colares, Muscares, and Rondo. Those varieties help mitigate the risk of, well, losing your whole crop to mold. They don't mention which grape varieties they used in the cuvee, but I got the information that they used oak chips to add a little bit of flavor to the wine. Oak chips don't necessarily make the wine more age-worthy. They don't really give the wine more weight and structure on the palate, but they give you a little bit of vanilla flavor. So first of all, this is actually a pretty golden, like dark colored wine. I mean, it doesn't look light just by looking at it in the glass. It has quite a lot of concentration and a really golden color. On the nose, it's kind of interesting. There are some minty notes there. There's quite a lot of apple and pear character. There's a little bit of red fruit coming through as well. And there's a little bit of vanilla, but it's not overpowering at all. It's actually more in the background. I think I can sense some of those muscety flavors here as well. So, but yeah, it's quite complex. The big advantage with cool climate wines is that the grapes ripen for longer usually, and therefore you tend to have more complex aromas building up in those berries, and that might lead to a more complex wine. So here we actually have quite a bit of complexity. On the label, they describe the flavors of their wine, and they're saying that it smells of barberries. And I had no idea what barberries are, but I looked them up. Those are barberries, apparently. Never used them as a descriptor because I still don't know what they taste like. On the palate, you definitely taste the freshness, the northern character. The acidity is quite elevated. It's quite light, 11.5% of alcohol. But there's also some body there. I mean, it's not just hard and harsh. It's not just acidic. There's also quite a lot of juiciness there. So it's actually quite nice. The mintiness on the nose is a little bit weird to me. It's a little too pronounced, but maybe that's the Latvian terroir. I have no idea. But yeah, it's a pretty good wine. So I'm going to rate this 89 points. I think it is pretty good, and I'm very surprised that it's possible to make a wine like that in Latvia. You can certainly still taste that northern influence. The wine is fresh. The aromatics are quite crisp and lively. But yeah, I mean, in a blind tasting, well, I would have never guessed Latvia. I mean, I've I just learned that they make wine there. So let's move on to a place where I definitely know that they make wine, and that's Germany, the Mosel. I've actually been to this vineyard. This is the 2022 Fransen Brema Calmont Riesling. The Brema Calmont is famous for being one of the, if not the most steep vineyard in the world, with the incline of 65 degrees. So this is absolutely crazy. In some places, the vineyard is kind of like this. So it's very difficult to grow grapes there, to harvest them, to move your tools into and out of the vineyards. Everything is really, really hard, but people still do it because they just, well, believe that it produces great fruit. Of course, in those very steep vineyards, you can't really mechanize anything. You have to do everything by hand. Apart from this little train that goes up the mountain. So if you want to go to the top, it kind of brings you up there. It's very uncomfortable. It's not like a proper train. It just is a very basic little tram that goes up a mono rack. And that is used for bringing tools up into the vineyard or getting the grapes out. The big advantage of steep vineyards is that you get a maximum amount of sun exposure. So in cool climates, it actually allows you to ripen grapes in some instances. And the other big advantage is that it gets as much water out of the vineyard as possible. So if you're in a very humid climate, steep vineyards really help you put your vines under a little bit of stress because they will get less water there than in the plains. The name Calmont apparently goes back to the Romans that called it Hot Mountain Caldus Mont. Last time I visited the Brema Calmont, I also visited Fransen Winery, and it's a very nice winery. They work real hard in order to get as much quality out of that special site. And actually, considering that the vineyard is this famous, the wines are actually fairly cheap, especially because this is really hard work. I mean, everything is done by hand. The yields are tiny. So it's actually a bargain, this stuff. Their vines in the Brema Calmont are very old. They are up to 85 years old, therefore producing really small amounts of grapes. And their emphasis in the winery is more on natural, spontaneous fermentation and minimal intervention. All right, this is quite a bit paler than the previous wine. Pale yellow, I'd say. On the nose, it has quite a delicious flavor. It has a combination of ripe apple, a little bit of caramel, and there's also a little bit of aroma of apricots. Yeah, it's a pretty typical Riesling flavor, but it's quite concentrated and complex. On the palate, it's actually quite rich and unctuous, considering that it's a Riesling from a cool region, but it does have quite a bit of power, even though I don't think it has a lot of alcohol. Yeah, the alcohol is at 11.5%, but the acidity is kind of more moderate compared to some other Mosel Rieslings. So one of the reasons people in the Mosel planted their vineyards on steep slopes was that was really the only way to fully ripen the grapes. Like this, the vineyards got enough sunshine, the vines got enough sunshine in order to fully ripen their fruit. Nowadays, the situation is a little bit different. As the climate is heating up, the temperatures are rising, and it's less difficult to ripen fruit. And in some cases, those steep vineyards are quite difficult to manage because if it's really dry and hot, those vineyards obviously will feel the impact more than vineyards down in the plains. The 2022 vintage in the Mosel was really hot and dry, and maybe we're feeling some of that impact in the wine. I mean, it's not an alcoholic wine like I mentioned, but the acidity might be a little lower than normally because the vineyard was just so hot and dry. And in the dry vintage, I also think that these old vines really help the winery in order to, maintain their quality levels. Old vines tend to have deeper roots, being able to source water from places where young vines don't get to. Overall, I think this is quite a delicious wine with lots of complexity and many layers, and I'm going to rate it 90 points. And I would recommend to you that you should go to the Mosel and climb up one of those steep vineyards in order to really appreciate all of the hard work that goes into making a wine from one of those sites. So next up, we have a wine that I'm quite familiar with, and it is from a really extreme terroir. It's not extremely cold or extremely steep, but it is extreme as it is very, very volcanic and right in the middle of the ocean. So this is the 2020 Estate Argyros Cuvee Monsignori from Santorini in Greece. The island of Santorini is basically a part of an ancient caldera of a volcano that erupted in 1600 BC. The soils are therefore made up of lots of volcanic material, ash and lava fragments, and there's also sand, but they are so poor that you don't really get any phylloxera on the island. You also don't get a lot of rainfall there, and it can be really hot, and there's a lot of wind, so this is definitely an extreme terroir. Because of those extreme conditions, the vines are styled in a basket shape in order to protect the fruit that grows inside that basket. And those old coluras, those old baskets, can be up to 200, even older than 200 years old. This one is actually made from some vines that are that old, which is absolutely crazy. Every year, the vineyard workers continue to work on that basket in order to keep it in shape. It's a real science, and it's amazing to look at. So if you're ever in Santorini, don't just hang out and take photos for your Instagram profile, also go into the vineyards. Argyros was founded in 1903, and it's one of the biggest owners of vineyards on the island. So if you ever want to really understand what terroir means, you should go to Santorini, and because it's so apparent, this is such an extreme island, the viticulture is so extreme that all this has to manifest itself somehow in the wine. So this is, again, kind of light golden in color. On the nose, this is actually really exciting. It smells of limes, lemon. There's also a little bit of peachiness coming through, and there's also some kind of briny, seaweedy character. So you can kind of smell the sea in that wine too. On the palate, there is a lot going on. Lots of grip, texture, a little bit of tannin, texture as well. But there's also great acidity, a lot of body too. This is not a light wine. It has a lot of power, but you can definitely also feel all that texture and the acidity that really keeps it fresh and lively. On the back label, they write the vines of Monsignori, the oldest Assyrtiko vines of the estate, the vines of Monsignor, our master, vines demanding respect by name and by nature. We cultivate these rare beasts and turn their fruit into wine, showing nothing less than utmost respect. So when you're tasting the wine, you can taste the heat, you can taste the freshness from the cold winds, you can taste the saltiness, you can taste the concentration that comes from those old vines. So this really represents this extreme terroir. This is good. I'm going to rate this 95 points, an absolutely delicious wine. Quite a big and complex wine, but definitely interesting. So we're moving on from one volcanic vineyard to an extremely sandy vineyard. This wine is from Colares, which is outside of Lisbon in Portugal. The vineyard for this wine is basically a beach right next to the Atlantic Ocean, and the soil is extremely sandy, so the vines really have to struggle in order to get to the water, in order to sustain themselves. Due to the proximity to the ocean, you also get a lot of sand, so the vines are trained very low, and in some cases there are some walls protecting them from the intense wind. So those vines really have to struggle in order to survive. And the region is actually not that well known. I mean, Santorini is much more famous. This Colares region is not that famous. And I actually have only tasted wines from there once. So I'm looking forward to tasting this one. Because of those sandy soils, they don't really have any problems with phylloxera, the root louse, because phylloxera is not able to move around in sandy soils. It doesn't really live there. So they can just plant their vines ungrafted. So they can just use the original vine, the original roots there, which is interesting. On top of that, the vineyard is not just extreme because it's basically a beach and because the vines are planted and grafted. It's also extreme because it's on the extreme western edge of Europe. So it's the most extreme west growing region in continental Europe. So you might not think, well, this is from southern Europe, it's from Portugal, and it's basically made on a beach. This must be super powerful and alcoholic, but it's not. It's actually 12% of alcohol. So the color is kind of light golden, not too dark. And the flavor is really interesting. It smells of oranges, apricots. It's a little creamy as well, like, yeah, apricots and cream, and it's quite delicious. And on the palate, it has this extreme texture. Well, there's concentration there, power, but there's also grip and freshness, good acidity. It's actually really lively. So yeah, what an interesting wine. I'm finding it a little bit difficult to pinpoint how the terroir manifests itself here. It doesn't have a lot of power from the sunshine. It doesn't necessarily show a lot of saltiness. And yeah, it doesn't have like a sandy character. In some wines, you actually have like a little bit of a sandy character. Wines from sandy soils tend to be a little bit more airy. This, however, doesn't really have that. So yeah, it's difficult to say, but it's certainly a super unique wine, quite delicious. So I'm going to rate this 93 points. I think this is just amazing, and it has this amazing story to tell as well. Still need to wrap my head around how the soil, the type of viticulture and all that influences the taste here. But the taste is delicious, and that's what really counts in the end. So we're moving on to another extreme vineyard. This time it's one of the southernmost wine growing regions in the world, and this wine is from Central Otago in New Zealand. So this is the 2021 Burnt Cottage Moonlight Race Pinot Noir from said region. And yeah, I mean, Central Otago is really special. It's located between the 45th and 46th degree latitude. And down there, the conditions are just very different. Obviously, it's fairly cold, being pretty much influenced by the South Pole. And then the UV radiation is just much more intense there, causing the grapes to develop even thicker skins. Another thing more unique to New Zealand is that there is a strong difference between day and nighttime temperatures. Temperatures drop significantly during the night, so it gets really, really cold. And during the day, it can get really warm again. The summers tend to be dry and can be fairly hot. So you have that balance between heat in order to ripen the fruit and freshness, cool temperatures during the night in order to retain the acidity and the aromatics. The winery was founded in 2002 by Diane and Marquis Sauvage, and it was apparently farmed biodynamically since the beginning. They use indigenous yeast and try to avoid playing around with the wine too much, so not much filtration and fining is going on. And they also pay attention to the lunar cycle, and that's why the wine is called Moonlight Race. Viticulture on the southern island in New Zealand is still a pretty recent development. In the 1970s, they started planting vines in Marlborough, which is now a super famous region, and Central Otago was developed even later than that, but it's now really highly recognized for the great Pinots. Pinot is definitely a grape variety that really highlights the characteristics of the place where it's grown. And in Central Otago, the Pinots are just different and can be absolutely delicious. So the wine has a fairly dark color, considering that it's Pinot. I mean, it's not super dark, but Pinots tend to be pretty light. And this definitely has some ruby color at the core. On the nose, it's really wild and delicious. There's ripe cherry fruit flavor. There's also a little bit of meatiness there. There are some strawberry characteristics coming through as well. There's a little bit of toasted oak flavor too, but not too much. So it's quite a complex wine. On the palate, it definitely shows quite a lot of grip and texture, great freshness. So here the terroir really comes through. This combination of power and body, as well as freshness and liveliness that you often get in many places in New Zealand, they are here as well. The dark color might have something to do with the intense UV radiation down there. So yeah, this speaks of the place where it's grown, the extreme place. where it's grown. So this is really high quality, but it doesn't taste like high quality Burgundy or a great Pinot Noir from California or Germany. This has its own identity. And I'm going to rate this 93 points. We're staying in the southern hemisphere, but we're moving to the other side, to Chile, and I'm tasting a wine from the desert. It's the 2018 Tara Atacama Syrah. The Atacama Desert only receives 1 to 3 millimeters of rainfall in some places, so it's extremely dry, and the vines therefore rely entirely on drip irrigation. Using irrigation obviously impacts the manifestation of terroir in your wine, but if you wouldn't irrigate here, you wouldn't get any wine at all. So they choose to irrigate a little bit. However, you still have those really dry growing conditions. You therefore don't get a lot of disease pressure. You get concentration, ripeness, and quite a lot of power here as well. On top of that, there is also the impact of more intense UV radiation, giving you more color, slightly different aromas. So this should be quite interesting. The desert environment also impacts the temperature of your vineyards. You have a strong difference between day and nighttime temperatures. You can have really hot days, and then at night it cools down to 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. And that also impacts the fruit. What is also interesting here is that it is a desert now, but it actually was at the bottom of the sea once. So quite a lot of the soil is calcareous of marine origin. So the wine is dark in color. I mean, this is obviously Syrah, so a grape variety that produces more intense and dark wines. And this definitely has a lot of color. On the nose, this is really exciting. Lots of dark berry fruit, cherries, but also this olive tapenade kind of character, some meatiness, a little bit of gamey flavor. So this is typical Syrah, but it's very bright and really clean in flavor as well. So it doesn't have that wildness that you sometimes get in the Rhone, for example. On the palate, this is quite structured and intense. The tannins are present. There's good acidity, good freshness there. It's kind of difficult to pinpoint how this kind of environment manifests itself in the wine. Definitely has that dark berry fruit character, that bright, clean flavor, the intense color that you often get in Chile. You also have a little bit of saltiness on the palate, which probably has an association with the calcareous soil in a way. Does it taste like a desert? I'm not entirely convinced. I mean, what would you think of when you think of tasting like a desert? You would probably think really hot, alcoholic, and like raisin fruit character. And I don't get any of that here. The alcohol is actually at 13%. So it's really moderate in alcohol. And it's just really bright, zingy. And it's a delicious wine. I think I'm using the word delicious quite a bit in this video, but I've tasted quite a few delicious wines. So I'm going to rate this 92 points. I think it's just beautiful Syrah that has a lot of identity, that feels really Chilean in character. And great stuff. We are moving up, maybe in terms of quality, but definitely in terms of altitude. This wine is from one of the, if not the highest vineyard in the world. The vines grow at 3,111 meters above sea level. So this is the 2018 Colomé Altura Maxima Malbec from Cafayate in Argentina. At that high altitude, a lot of different factors come into play. The vineyard receives more sunshine than usual vineyards further down below. The intensity of the sunlight is higher. You get less UV protection. Therefore, again, you ripen your grapes, you get thicker skins. The vine tries to protect itself from this hostile environment. On top of that, the temperatures don't really go up that high. They reach maybe 28 degrees Celsius, but rarely go above that. And at nighttime, the temperatures drop significantly to like 6 degrees Celsius. So you have a diurnal shift in temperatures of more than 20 degrees Celsius. That is obviously massive, and that impacts the growing cycle of the vine. So the grapes can ripen for longer, oftentimes developing more more complex flavors. It's also the case that the air is less dense at that altitude, so you have less CO2. The plant needs CO2 in order to do photosynthesis, so you have less of an accumulation of sugar at those altitudes. That said, however, this is quite a powerful wine. It has 15% of alcohol, so all of those arguments rather point towards a fresher, lighter style of wine, but this is a powerful red. The area is also really dry, so it receives less than 200 millimeters of rainfall per annum. So this is kind of a semi-desert environment as well. So check that out. That's definitely like, I mean, that's dark colored. That's like really dark. I better not spill any on my white shirt. This is a powerful, really concentrated wine, and I think it needs a little bit of time. I mean, it's 2008 vintage, so it had some time in bottle, but this is a little close right now. Wow. On the palate, this is quite something. I mean, really concentrated, rich, powerful, grippy, fine tannins, good freshness as well. Lots of, concentration though. A little bit dark and brooding, so this definitely doesn't feel like a light mountain wine that kind of grew in cooler conditions. It is a wine with lots of power, but it's also a wine that has lots of dimensions, and I think that complicated terroir and the vineyard high up in altitude, those semi-arid conditions and all that definitely factor in that complexity. So the wine definitely has a lot of blackberry fruit, a lot of dark kind of dusty notes as well. The oak is present in that wine. It was aged in barriques for 24 months, and you can definitely feel some of that. On the palate, this is just delicious. I mean, it's really well structured. Lots of power, but great fine tannins, great acidity, freshness, a lot of grip, a lot of length. So I would serve that slightly chilled because of that intense alcohol. But yeah, it's just really, really interesting. And that with a steak. So I'm going to rate this 95 points, an absolutely massive, mountainous kind of wine, but quite delicious as well. It's probably not the wine that I would want to drink after hiking up one of those high mountains though, but a delicious, delicious wine. This was a great tasting, and it really showed that sometimes you have to go for the extremes to find something really delicious, different, and mind-blowing. This Latvian wine was quite delicious, and it really highlighted what is possible high up north. It wasn't the best wine in the tasting, but it was the best wine I ever had from Latvia. The Bremmer Calmont from Fransen, which is near and dear to my heart, was also really great, but it also showed that Extreme Vineyards, when the conditions are changing, might also be at a disadvantage. So what was needed in order to ripen fruit back in the day might actually lead to slightly less edgy kind of wines today when it gets really hot. The Monsignori from Santorini was absolutely delicious, and this wine really shows its terroir. I think everything is there. You can really get what Santorini is all about after tasting this wine. The Colares Branco was an stunning wine, really great, really unique in character. I still need to figure out how that can be traced back to the beach where this grows. The burnt Cottage was absolutely delicious too, and here you can definitely sense the freshness and vibrancy of the southern island in New Zealand, and maybe also the intense sunlight that you get there. And those two from South America were also really great. The Tara extreme Syrah fruit and this extreme altitude resulting in an extreme expression of Malbec. But what a great wine. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like it down there. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, what is the extremest vineyard that you have ever come across? Let me know down below in the comments. But whatever you do, stay thirsty.